So how did the church stop being so Jewish? People ask me this question all the time. How did it go from this, what we read in the first 15 chapters of Acts, to what we have today or what went on later? Well, the answer is not so simple, but then there are some very simple things that can be said that will help us understand how this might have happened. So let's just say that the book of Acts, it ends in the 60s. The book of Acts ends with Paul being imprisoned in Rome. But shortly after that, in the year 66 CE, a first Jewish revolt begins, and Jerusalem temple is destroyed in the year 70. It's burned, it's sacked, it's robbed, and it's just trashed and ruined. When that happens, this is a major tragedy from which Judaism still have not recovered. And we still talk about it all the time, every year. Every Jewish community, synagogue talks about it and remembers the events of that destruction. It still rings in many people's hearts and minds. When that happened, quite a significant number of Jewish population in Israel were killed. Others were enslaved and displaced. They were taken away into slavery. This was a great destruction that happened between the year 66 and the year 70. The war and then the final taking of Jerusalem. So many lives are gone. Now, that's not all, because in the year 132 CE came the second Jewish revolt against Rome. And this one is known often as the Bar Kokhba Rebellion. In the year 135 CE, the rest of the holy city was destroyed and soon after rebuilt as a Roman city and even renamed. So now we have another destruction in 135. When that happened, there's yet another tragedy that is also remembered in Jewish tradition today. A large number of Jews, again, were killed, others enslaved, and this time all the Jewish residents of Jerusalem were basically permanently expelled from the holy city vicinity. So when we read in the book of Acts about thousands upon thousands of Jews who embraced Yeshua in the early chapters of Acts, all of these people are now gone. What happened to them? Some have scattered, some were killed, some were enslaved. Destruction, war, brings about these kinds of events. So I know this shocks a lot of people when I say this, but the truth is that the Jerusalem church that we know as the Jewish church had no Jews by the year 136 CE, because no Jews were even allowed anywhere near Jerusalem. No Jews in Jerusalem church in the year 136. So you can see the trajectory of where things are now moving. People ask the question, how did this happen? Well, study the history, understand the events, and you could see how this transformation could have just been a natural course of events that nobody really thought much about until many centuries later we sit around and scratch our heads and say, how did this happen? So as we look at this history, we realize that Jews became an oppressed minority. They became an oppressed minority in their own land. And the majority of Judeans no longer even resided in Israel. Many people were scattered all over the Roman Empire. Now, this particular fact, the Jews no longer lived together in the same area, coupled with the political changes that occurred, that alone minimized any possible influence that the Christ-following Jews could have had. That just made their influence so insignificant when you're talking about the scale of things that were happening in the world. So yes, politics, war, changes absolutely has affected everything that we're studying and reading about in the book of Acts. So the rest of the second century, as time went on, became even bleaker for Jewish followers of Christ. Because what happened next is that the very assemblies that they originally established all over the Mediterranean, all these different places that Paul and Barnabas went to, right? All of the places that Jewish missionaries has reached out to, all of these assemblies began to develop their own spiritual identity. And that identity was now untethered from the Judeans. Why? Because the Judeans were recently defeated rebels and enemies of Rome. In the end, Roman Empire was Roman Empire, and Jews were just a bunch of rebels, ingrates who rebelled against mighty Rome, and they were crushed. Such is the history. This is what happens. So when people ask, how did we get to where we are, or how did we, just a couple of centuries later, end up in such a different circumstances? Hopefully this little bit of a summary helps you understand how we got there. Now, to summarize what you have just seen and experienced, I'm hoping that this entire course, the stories of the Jewish church, the first part, the second, third part, were helpful to you. And as you have embarked on this long journey with me, I am hoping that you have enjoyed rereading some of these passages together with me. And what I am hopeful is that I may have stirred you to go and reread them even more on your own and study some of those references that I gave you. Because as we read the book of Acts, there's always more than one way of understanding it, always more than one way of reading it. All I am offering in this course and in many of my other courses is another perspective, another look. And it's based on my understanding, it's based on my own study, it's based on my own research and things that I have understood. And I think that is a perspective that a lot of times is missed, because people are not looking at these stories as the stories of the Jewish church. And so if you are able to see that, then that means I've achieved my objective.
What Bible do you read? And how do you know it's the right one?
There's only one version of the Bible, right?
It might surprise you to learn that Bible translations led to many versions of Holy Scripture. Long ago, translators interpreted the Hebrew Bible, ensuring it would be enjoyed in many languages. But when they encountered Hebrew words they didn't understand, translators relied on their individual cultural context and used different words with different meanings unrelated to the original ones. This led to Bible versions that lacked the full, beautiful, original explanations becoming part of our history. That's why when you join our online classes, you'll get back to the source of the original Hebrew Bible to uncover hidden meanings.
Get back to the source. Join our online course today, where the treasures of the authentic Bible await you.
Click on the link and register to start your biblical experience.